Every election season, millions of Americans say the same thing. I feel like I am choosing the lesser of two evils. If you have said that or heard someone say it, you are not alone. Gallup has tracked party identification for decades. Consistently, roughly 4 in 10 Americans identify as independents rather than as Democrats or Republicans. That is not a fringe position. That is a plurality of the American public, saying the two-party system does not fully represent them. In episode 102, we documented how the Electoral College and winner-take-all elections structure political competition. We introduced Duverger's law, the political science observation that plurality, winner-take-all systems structurally favor two dominant parties. And we mentioned the spoiler effect. Tonight, in episode 103, I want to go deeper on all three of those things, because the connection between them is the reason the two-party system has lasted more than 150 years, and the reason changing it is harder than most people realize. Here's what I want you to hold in your mind as you watch this episode. The United States Constitution does not mention political parties. Not once. The founders were skeptical of what they called factions. The two-party system is not a constitutional requirement. It is an outcome of structural choices, electoral rules, ballot access laws, campaign finance laws, and a winner-take-all architecture that the documents produced, not mandated, which means it can, in theory, be changed by documents. Tonight, I am going to make the case that more competition would be good for American democracy, and I am going to tell you honestly what stands in the way. Let's start with the most documented example of what the current system does to a third-party candidate. In 1992, Ross Perot ran for president as an independent candidate. He was a billionaire with name recognition, significant organizational capacity, and a message about the federal deficit and political dysfunction that resonated with tens of millions of Americans. The FEC documents what happened. Perot received 18,956 popular votes. That is 18.9% of the total votes cast, nearly 1 in 5 American voters. He won 0 electoral votes, not because his voters did not show up, not because the election was close, because under the winner-take-all electoral college system, a candidate who comes in second or third in every state wins nothing. Perot won approximately 19% of the vote almost everywhere, and finished third almost everywhere. Winner-take-all means third place wins nothing. This is Duverger's law in documented practice. The structure of the electoral system does not just make it hard for third parties to win. It makes voting for a third party feel, rationally, like helping your least preferred major party candidate win. And here is the piece that connects directly to episode 102. The Electoral College amplifies this effect at the presidential level. A candidate who wins 25 or 30% of the popular vote in most states, but does not win a plurality in any single state, wins 0 electoral votes. That is not a theoretical possibility. The 1992 election documented it with nearly 19 million votes. The Perot example is not an argument against third parties. It is a precise illustration of what the structural barriers actually look like. Documented, numbered, and verifiable on fec.gov right now. The structural barriers facing any serious third party in the United States fall into 2 categories: electoral system barriers, the rules of how votes are counted, and practical barriers, the accumulated advantages that make the 2 major parties almost impossible to compete with from scratch. Electoral system barriers. Winner-take-all elections mean that voting for a third party often helps the major party candidate you least prefer. This is the spoiler effect. Documented in 1992 with Perot, documented in 2000 in Florida when third-party votes arguably affected the outcome. Duverger's law, the political science research consistently shows that plurality winner-take-all systems produce two-party dominance. It is not an accident. It is a predictable structural outcome. Primary elections are state-funded and state-administered for the 2 major parties. Third parties generally organize and fund their own primary processes, or skip them entirely at significant organizational disadvantage. Practical barriers, ballot access, 50 states, 50 different sets of rules. Some require tens of thousands of petition signatures collected under strict deadlines. Some require substantial filing fees. The time and money consumed before a single vote is cast is enormous. Campaign finance. The major parties have donor networks, PAC structures, volunteer organizations, and experienced staff built over decades. A new party starts from zero. We documented the campaign finance landscape in episode 101. Debate access. The Commission on Presidential Debates requires 15% national polling support to qualify for the presidential debates. For a new party with limited media coverage, achieving 15% in polling is nearly impossible before the debates that would give them the visibility to achieve 15% in polling. The table is in front of you, both columns. This is the documented wall. Before I make the case for why more competition would be good, I want to be honest about what third parties have and have not accomplished in American history, because the record is more nuanced than either their advocates or critics usually acknowledge. Third parties have influenced American policy repeatedly without winning the presidency. The Populist Party, founded in 1892, never elected a president. What it did was put onto the national agenda a set of ideas that were considered radical at the time. A graduated income tax, railroad regulation, and the direct election of senators by the people rather than by state legislatures. All three of those ideas became law. The 16th Amendment established the income tax. The 17th Amendment, which we documented in EDU 48, established direct election of senators. Railroad regulation came through the Progressive Era legislation that followed. The Populist Party lost every presidential election it entered, and it changed the country. The counterargument is real. If your goal is policy change, working within one of the existing major parties may be more effective than building a new one from scratch. The documented history of third-party policy influence largely supports this. The ideas move into the major parties, not through third parties winning elections. But there is one exception in American history. One documented case of a third party not just influencing the major parties, but replacing one. In the 1850s, the Whig Party collapsed over the question of slavery. Into that collapse came the Republican Party, founded in 1854, focused on opposing the expansion of slavery. 6 years after its founding, Abraham Lincoln was elected as the first Republican president. That is the one documented historical case. It required the complete collapse of a major party. It happened during the most profound national crisis since the Revolution, and it took 6 years of organizing before the first presidential win. The history is honest. Third parties rarely replace major parties, but they do change what major parties stand for, and in one case, they changed everything. In episode 102, we documented that changing the Electoral College requires a constitutional amendment, a deliberately high bar. But there is a reform that does not require changing the Constitution that has already been implemented in American states, and that directly addresses the spoiler effect that makes third-party voting feel like a wasted vote. It is called ranked choice voting. Under ranked choice voting, instead of choosing one candidate, voters rank their preferences in order: first choice, second choice, third choice, and so on. If no candidate wins a majority of first choice votes, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and their voters' second choices are redistributed. This continues until one candidate has a majority. The critical effect for third parties: under ranked choice voting, you can vote for your genuine first preference without helping your least preferred candidate win. The spoiler effect, the structural reason millions of Americans feel forced to choose the lesser of two evils, is substantially reduced. Maine became the first state to use ranked choice voting in a federal election, under a statute enacted through citizen initiative in 2016 and taking effect in 2018. It has been used in Maine's congressional and presidential primaries and general elections. Alaska took it further. In 2020, Alaskan voters passed Ballot Measure 2, which established a top 4 primary, where all candidates, regardless of party, compete in a single primary and the top 4 advance, followed by a ranked choice voting general election. The system was used in 2022 and produced outcomes that cross-party competition advocates point to as a demonstration that the system works in practice. These are not hypothetical reforms. They are operating systems. The statutes are public, the results are documented, and they represent the most significant structural shift toward third-party viability that exists in documented American practice today. Here is where I stand, clearly, as my position. I believe a political system with more meaningful competition produces better outcomes for ordinary Americans than a system locked into two choices. That is not a partisan argument. It is an accountability argument when either major party knows that roughly 4 in 10 Americans identify as independents and that those voters have nowhere else to go if they want their vote to count. Neither party has full incentive to earn that vote. Guaranteed voters are not the same as persuaded voters. Competition changes that calculation. The counter-argument is honest, and I respect it. Working within the existing major parties may be more effective at producing policy change than building a new party from scratch. The Populist Party's ideas became law through Democratic and Republican legislation, not through Populist Party victories. That is documented, but I believe that the structural barriers to third-party competition, the spoiler effect, the ballot access laws, the campaign finance disadvantage, the 15% debate threshold, are not natural features of democracy. They are choices embedded in laws and rules that benefit the people who would vote to change them. The same structural problem we documented in EDU 45, EDU 48, and POL 101. The documented path forward does not require waiting for a Whig Party collapse. Ranked choice voting is operating in Maine and Alaska right now. The statute is public. The results are documented. Any state can adopt it through citizen initiative or legislative action. And below the presidential level, at city councils, county offices, state legislatures, third-party and independent candidates win regularly. The structural barriers are highest at the presidential level. Building from the bottom up over years is the documented model for how third parties have historically built the organizational base they needed. The Constitution does not mandate two parties. The documents that created two-party dominance are the same kind of documents that can change it. State statutes, ballot initiatives, election rules. More voices, more competition, more accountability. That is the American principle this series has been making the case for. In episode 101 on campaign finance, in episode 102 on the Electoral College, and tonight in episode 103 on third parties. The documents are in the description. This is Words with Wentz. Know your rights.
Let the signal cut through the noise. Reading between the lines. Every story leaves a trace, unlocking time and space, finding truth